Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth from Garforth Education, and this is the Right to Read initiative, where we're trying to promote information about making sure our children and students have access to the right to read. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Dr. Georgiou from the University of Alberta. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Kathryn. It's my pleasure to join you. So anything else to present, or am I supposed to start?
No, I thought if we just start out with a little bit of who you are and what you've been doing recently, and then we'll talk about the right to read inquiry and the recommendations that it's made as far as curriculum goes.
Great, sure. I know that this is supposed to be a very informal, conversational, friendly environment to have a nice afternoon discussion with teachers and parents and other members of the community who are interested about the Ontario Human Rights Report and how it applies to education. And so when you contacted me, Kathryn, I was pleased to get your email. I know that this is something that is certainly great to have, and I refer to the Ontario Human Rights Commission report. I know that many of our teachers want to know a little bit more about it, and what does it really mean? What are the next steps, perhaps? How I see it personally, so whatever I share today is my personal views. I have to clarify this because I was not involved in this process of setting or creating this Ontario Human Rights Commission report. I was very pleased with the announcement and with the recommendations made. They are very much in line with the work we have been doing for the last 15 years here in Alberta. And I'm very pleased that many of the people that have been part of that work are actually with us today, and they are listening to this presentation. So I am a professor in the Department of Educational Psychology at the University of Alberta. I have a B.Ed degree. I taught for 2 years back in Cyprus, where I come originally. I taught grades 2 and 3 before coming here to do my master's and Ph.D. and before going to Finland to complete my postdoctoral fellowship. I have been a faculty member of the U of A since 2008. And the reason I haven't left, and I think I have repeated this multiple times, is the partnership I have with the schools. Nothing else keeps me here. And the great work of our teachers and the friendship and collaboration with many of the principals and the superintendents of this province. For the last 2 years, I have been involved in the development of the new English language, arts, and literature curriculum in Alberta. And for the teachers from Alberta that are part of this webinar today, and I know that some of them are with us today, the minister made the announcement in the morning with the release of the final version from high level. And actually right now I am in high level. I came because I was invited to give my opening remarks for the draft curriculum. And I actually mentioned the Ontario Human Rights Commission report in my comments this morning at the press conference. So that's about me. I have a wonderful group of graduate students that I work with. I have an amazing group of expert teachers that are working in Alberta Education, and they are developing sample lesson plans for different components of the curriculum so we can train the teachers as best as possible. So it's a lot of work, but I'm very pleased that it's done and it has an impact. And I refer to not just how I feel about it, not just how teachers feel about it, but what the data really shows when we assess the kids. And it clearly shows that there is a measurable improvement despite the fact that we are going through these pandemic days.
Yeah, well, COVID has really thrown every teacher for a bit of a loop with none of our teacher education programs, I believe, had ever prepared teachers for what to do in a pandemic situation. So it's starting afresh and trying to figure out what's best, but it's also provided a lot of opportunities for professional development in more of an informal manner through various webinars and book studies that have been happening. And this is where a lot of teachers are just beginning to learn about and hear more about something that's often referred to as structured literacy, or the science of reading. And when we look at the Ontario Human Rights Commission's report, the recommendation does talking about making our curriculum align with structured literacy and moving away from some of the current practices that have been in vogue for several years now. So before we take a deeper dive in what we should be doing each grade, do you want to just take a moment to talk about what you feel structured literacy represents?
Yeah, this has been a point of discussions that I have had over the last 12 years with different teachers, different principals. I work very closely with Dr. Matthew Kierstad, one of the, I think one of the most pioneer and passionate principals I have worked with. And we have, and also discussions with superintendents. So I want to get their feeling about what does this mean for them? What does this translate to in practice in classrooms? And it's one thing to decide on what are the foundational skills that you need to teach. So that's one part of the question. So I feel that we first have to solve that part of the question before we really actually determine what is structured literacy.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
We have had discussions over discussions, and I can say this very confidently after the release of the new curriculum about things that I feel are no-brainers. The 5 pillars of literacy instruction, they have been around for 22 years now. Research on phonological awareness, phonics, etc. The first good quality studies were published in the early 90s. And we are discussing in 2022 what the foundational skills of reading are. And even, I understand having discussions, we can have as many discussions as we want. That doesn't change the fact that research has been around for almost 30 years now. It has been very clear what the skills are. But a structured way of teaching them is a new level in the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Means that we have a scope and sequence in place. Means that we provide explicit instruction to the kids. We turn in what we think as being implicit to explicit, because sometimes we think the kids understand something when we present it to them, but they don't. So we want to make the implicit explicit, and we want to have a systematic approach in introducing and teaching this skill. For example, I have seen the list of GPCs and grapheme phoneme correspondences taught in any possible way you can imagine. There are teachers today that may even start teaching the alphabet from the very beginning and go and the sounds that correspond to each of the letters before they go on into some other combinations of letters that are more frequent than some of the single letters in the alphabet. So there are lots of unknowns yet, but we have covered a lot of ground in reading research. And I think, honestly, I didn't feel we should see the Ontario Human Rights Commission published. For me, whatever is included there should have been happening already.
Yeah, and
it's not. So it's a very welcomed addition. It has given governments a lot of tools to discuss, to think about, reflect on what their teachers are actually doing. Like even today, I received, after the announcement, all of the aspects that the Ontario Human Rights Report includes. They are, every single one of them is in the curriculum that we produced and shared with teachers. Every single one. And today, Alberta Teachers Association, they said, we want the feedback from the teachers. So we don't think of the purpose. We don't think of the benefits of the curriculum. We care about what teachers' feedback has given us a year ago. I can discuss about the teachers' feedback for hours. I have received more than 500 emails, just myself, not to mention the emails and reports that went to Alberta Education. Thousands of comments. What purpose does this serve? Like to reinvent the wheel? That's my personal belief about it.
Yeah, and the thing that we have to take into consideration is that in the 80s, there was this gain of the idea of whole language instruction, and that transformed into balanced literacy. And the vast majority of our current teaching population was brought up or trained in that approach to teaching reading. And when we look at structured literacy, a lot of the components have been around for decades, as we've mentioned, but not part of the teacher education program. And so teachers are left to discover these principles by chance.
You have identified the source of the problem. You have just said, Kathryn, what the root of the problem is. And I said this multiple times, the root of the problem are the faculties of education.
Yeah, well, and hopefully with this new curriculum being released in Alberta, that's that first step forward, because the faculty of education in Alberta are going to have to teach their incoming teachers or their pre-service teachers to be able to teach this new curriculum to the classroom that they are going to get. The problem is it's going to take about 30 years at least for the turnover to occur, that all of these new pre-service teachers are going to be our teaching population. So we need to create something to help those current in-service teachers gain this new knowledge and not say it's your fault you didn't know this. Saying, look, we're sorry this was missing from your education. We want to help you learn how to address these issues, and we need to do it in an explicit manner.
Yeah. Well, it takes myself and Dr. Kierstad about 2 years to turning a school division and training the teachers and the principals to understand the foundational skills and how to interpret data. First year, when they hear us talk about all these foundational skills and all of these concepts, many of the teachers have no clue what we're talking about. And therefore, if we have the expectation that they will automatically implement this and all the kids will be benefiting, that is, wishful thinking. It is the second year around when they hear us talking the same thing again, then things start to click together.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, oh, I tried this in my class last year. I remember how the kids reacted. This might be a nice way I can improve my teaching this year. And we start polishing practices. So I can tell you that the school divisions we have worked with from scratch, day one, with teachers that they have limited knowledge of the foundational skills, in 2 years' time, they are on track. We already see growth in the first year, but the second year around is when they are either at or above grade level expectations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really amazing to see the light bulbs go off in these young children when they figure out the code and they move away from some of the strategies that we've taught before. And once a teacher realizes the success and the speed at which their students able to grasp these new concepts compared to what they've done in the past, it's really that light bulb moment for the teacher as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have seen this again and again, Kathryn. And I'm saying this not only like today here at Fort Vermilion School Division, Northern Alberta. They say if you talk to the superintendent, he says we are in the middle of the bush, in the middle of nowhere. We trained the teachers 5 years ago. We came back the year after, we retrained them. We had meetings with the principals. The superintendent is fully on board and committed. At this point in time, I can confidently tell you that Fort Vermilion School Division is the most improved school division in Alberta.
Yeah, and that's consistent with other research that we're seeing, that making that transition from a balanced literacy instructional approach to a structured literacy or science of reading approach to reading instruction is taking about 3 to 5 years. So the more that we can do to help schools along this process and teachers and create that accepting community that provides the support, and it's system-wide support. It's not just one teacher making the change. It's not just one school or the principal, the support staff. It's everyone involved making that investment. And I think a really important thing to highlight is we're not just making changes in these children's reading instruction and their ability to read. We're making changes for their lifelong outcomes, because illiteracy has huge social emotional impact and costs us as taxpayers a lot of money. Now, there is a question asking, how do we as a profession move past the political egg throwing of new curricula and talk about what really matters, which is student learning?
That's a great question. I can answer as a researcher, not as a politician. I care less about politics. I care about kids. And I can tell you that there are multiple layers into this problem. So it's not only about how well George prepares teachers, or how good the curriculum can be, or how many webinars George and Kathryn will be having. You need every part of this chain to work collaboratively to make this happen. I'm very disappointed today after all this work for a year and a half. Kathryn, I must have replied to more than 500 emails from teachers and parents and phone calls and attended several meetings across the province. We also invited, and I mentioned this multiple times to the top international experts on each part of the ELA curriculum. So, for example, I can say his name because he's my collaborator, Dr. Robert Savage, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Education at York University and the person who developed the abracadabra that many of our teachers are using when teaching the phonological awareness and phonics, etc. We created together the phonics intervention programs with my doctoral student, Christy Dunn, to help the kids here in Alberta. 82% of them improved. Yet, I'm hearing today from ATA that we care less about what the curriculum says. We don't trust the minister, and therefore we are not supporting. So what am I supposed to do as George?
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other thing that I hear raised a lot is the teacher autonomy. And while teachers do have freedom in how they teach aspects of the curriculum, they do have a professional responsibility to meet the educational needs of their students. And I think we get problems when we say that when we're telling you best practices in teaching, we're taking away your teacher autonomy.
Mm-hmm. I'm perfect. I will use the words of Superintendent Mike McMahon from Fort Vermilion. Mm-hmm. Fort Vermilion had almost 60% kids reading below grade level 5 years ago. Like, think about this, 60%. So when he took over, he said, what are the chances we will reduce this number if we keep doing the same thing? Close to zero. So then we'll bring the expert in to tell us what we should be doing. And we will measure the impact of what George tells us to do using reliable, valid, standardized, norm reference assessments, not the ones that George develops or Kathryn has in mind or prefers, whatever. And we will check how the kids are growing. If they are not growing to the right direction, we have to change practices. And I'm not telling you you are not a good teacher, but I'm also knowing that 3/4 of your class, they are struggling readers. Mm-hmm. So if you don't move your kids to become better, I need to tell you what you should be doing. Or someone else has to train you to do a better job. Because we know that 95% of the kids can read. And he had 60% non-readers. So he took part of the teacher autonomy away, but at the same time, he provided training to his staff. Not just, he didn't just bring me, he brought also math experts. He brought principals who have had experience growing their school unit by so many years. He brought them in to talk to the principals. So he provided all the means to his staff to succeed. And he has been measuring. And year after year, they are growing. And that has been very important for the teachers because now they see that, oh, my work pays off. And they were more excited and they wanted to do more and engage in research. Then they started bringing in research, like intervention programs and other things, standardization of assessments, etc. So that knowledge was channeled back to the teachers, and that improved their practice to the point that today he mentioned that they have less than 18% struggling kids from 60% in 5 years' time. So that's why I said they are the most improved school division in Alberta. But you see, the superintendent is living day and night breathing about literacy.
Mm-hmm.
He calls me at 10 o'clock and says, George, what should we be doing? Like, I have this problem. Tell me, what do you think? He applies for grants from the government to bring resources to the teachers. He flies experts here to train his teachers. And then they measure the kids' reading performance and math performance using norm referenced assessment.
Definitely. There is a question wondering what grade you were speaking of about the 60% below reading level. And they were wondering what measures you use for the reading achievement, if you're willing to talk about that.
Yeah, when he said 60% overall across grade levels, when we first looked at his data 5 years ago, we used some color coding. So every kid scoring below a standard score of 85, they are color coded with a red color. The first time we got the data, teachers were crying because everybody, almost everybody, was in red. They were so behind. And now they are perfectly normal. You see that bell curve, just you would expect from any typical in developing grade level, typical in developing school, they behave normally, even slightly better to the right of the mean in the bell curve in 5 years' time. The assessment we use, assessment is a long story, but briefly we use we call them the 3 T's, but that stands for the Taure, which has the real words and non-words, and the teachers are testing individually each child for 45 seconds. We use the TOSREF, which is test of word reading fluency, which is the task where they put slashes to separate the words within 3 minutes. And we also use TOSREC. And TOSREC is when they read a sentence and there is a yes, no at the end, and they have to circle whether yes, if the meaning is correct, no, if the meaning is wrong. And you give them 3 minutes to do this task. So they are quick. They have alternate forms. They are norm referenced assessments. But Fort Vermilion also took it to a new level. They created a system where it automatically converts raw scores to standard scores and percentile ranks and grade equivalents. So teachers don't have to do anything. They just input on the system a number, the raw score, and it's automatically converted into everything else.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Do you know of any school districts in BC implementing the structured literacy?
I'm not aware of any, even though I know that one of the superintendents who was working for St. Albert Catholic has moved to Kamloops, Rhonda Nixon, and I think she's very much in favor of structured literacy, and she wants to implement this in her school division. But I haven't worked with schools in BC. I would love to.
I would too. All right, now we're having some wonderful questions, but I want to shift our focus to the topic of our conversation just to make sure that we cover those, because I think that's why a lot of people are
discuss for as long as you want. I will be here until I have to leave only at 6 p.m. because I have dinner arrangements with the superintendent and principals of Fort Vermilion, which is 5 o'clock in BC. So we have until 5 o'clock in BC or 6 o'clock in Alberta to discuss whatever questions you guys may have.
Wonderful. So let's go to what structured literacy and what key things we need to look at each grade level, and then we will go back to answering questions.
I have a presentation, Kathryn, so I would like to share this and talk about recommendations 27 and 28 from the Ontario Human Rights Commission report.
Perfect.
Is that okay with you?
Wonderful.
Okay, so let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the title, when we were discussing this, we thought what the right to read inquiry looks like in practice. So I'll be speaking about that. But before I get there, I thought it's better if I explain to our audience, how did we end up here? And we started talking a little bit about that at the beginning, but I think it's important to set the stage of why did Ontario Human Rights actually produce this document? I will start by using this excerpt from Mark Seidenberg's language at the site of speech. And it's clear that the reason why I present this is because basically what Mark says is that we figured it out in research, but that knowledge didn't make it to classrooms. There is a gap, and that's what I have been trying to do with my graduate students and colleagues to bridge that gap. So bring research into every classroom. And in the last couple of years, as being the director of the JPDAS Center on Developmental and Learning Disabilities, we also organized the annual conference on different topics. And I know that many schools from BC have been attending the annual conference where we have experts on different aspects of reading or mathematics, etc. So the intention is to bring that knowledge to every classroom. I think that is important, and remember this because one of the recommendations says, consult the experts. Okay, so it's clear that they want the experts to have a voice into what is happening in the classrooms. I thought about this, the title of this slide, how hot is the potato? And why I'm presenting this is because I have heard multiple times over and over again that we are doing fantastically well in PISA tests, as Canada, the whole country, even as Alberta, we have like one of the top scores. And so what's the point? Why should we change our practices? We're doing just fine. Is it necessary? Well, the answer is that it's absolutely necessary to change our practices because the numbers from the actual schools reporting how many kids are struggling, they are very alarming. And the word alarming is perhaps an understatement. It's more than alarming. In 2017, in Edmonton Journal, they were saying that 27% of the kids in Edmonton Public, they were reading below grade level. And actually, a member of a trustee of that school board in 2021 said that our scores in reading and math have declined over the last 5 years. So the 27% in my mind is close to 32 right now. I also copied and pasted this from Elk Island Public's 2019-2020 report to public, and it shows that 35% of the kids in the fall of 2019, as well as in the fall of 2020, they either needed urgent intervention, so the kids in red, or they needed intervention, some probably, tier 2 intervention. Yesterday, I also asked the minister's office in Alberta to give me some numbers. That is the first time that I am sharing this publicly, of how many kids the school divisions across Alberta reported as being struggling in reading, and they needed money from the government for intervention. These are kids in grades 1, 2, and 3. The enrollment of kids in these grade levels in Alberta is 166,000. Okay. Now the schools requested funding for 56,000 kids. That's about 33%. 54,000 kids. 54 divided by 166,000, that's about 32 point something. And this is only of the school divisions that they actually applied for the funding. So the number is actually much higher. 32.3% of the kids not reading in January or in the fall of 2021 and needing intervention. That's 1 every 3 kids. In my mind, that is very alarming. And it shouldn't surprise us, because this is already known. The Statistics Canada in 2008 and also later on, they said that 42% of Canadian adults, they lack the functional literacy skills. So put the dots together, 33% of the kids in early grades, 42% of the adults. The numbers go up. I don't think this is a compliment for our education and what we do to address or teach reading in our schools. At the same time, keep these numbers in mind, compare them to the 18% that Superintendent McMahon mentioned today in his school division that are struggling readers. Less than half. By doing what? Teaching best practices in a structured way, by training his staff, by using a preventative model to reading difficult. In other words, don't wait until the child is in grade 3 to take action. Superintendent McMahon takes action in kindergarten, which is also one of the recommendations of the Ontario Human Rights Report. So all of this, in the presence of data and reports that have been around at least since 2000. And you are aware, I bet most of you are already aware of the National Reading Panel report. You can download it from Google. It's about 300 pages long document where all the reading experts gathered in the US, I think we had some Canadians participating in that consortium. And they said there are 5 pillars that are the most influential when you teach them. That's in 2000, 22 years ago. Phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and reading comprehension. Now, I had discussions with several experts and Matthew on this, and I think we agree that actually the inclusion of comprehension in this is a little bit misleading. And I will explain why this is misleading. Because comprehension is actually the product of everything else. So if you include it there, you give it the same kind of entity as everything else. Whereas we know that to become a good comprehender, you need everything else. It's a combination of the other skills. And in 2008, August and Shanahan replicated the findings of the National Reading Panel for second language learners. They found exactly the same results, that these 5 are very important. So within 8 years, we had the replication, and in generalization of the findings in 2 different groups, typical kids as well as kids who are learning English as a second language. And then in 2009, this book, Visible Learning. Now, I have several reservations about the methodology that was followed here, but the reason why I present this is to show you like the sequence, the history of how we came to today and the report. So why I'm presenting this to you is because John Haddy had a list of about 20 different skills and ranked them in terms of the effect sizes, how much impact these skills have if you teach them to the kids. What is number 4 and 5 the most effective? Vocabulary instruction. Number 5, phonemic awareness and phonics instruction. So Haddy, who is not a reading researcher, gathered up the evidence of these systematic reviews and reached the same conclusion. That was already known in 2000 from the National Reading Panel. So from 2009 to 2022, how did we come here? Obviously, the number of kids who are struggling has been rising, and I just proved that to you. We also know that the faculties of education, at least in Alberta, they are doing a very poor job in training pre-service teachers to become teachers of reading. In the Faculty of Education at the U of A, we only have one pre-required course on literacy, and it's called literacy. So you can imagine that whatever is related to literacy, you would expect that an undergraduate third-year student to take a 13 weeks course and learn everything that you need to be a very competent teacher of reading. Be able to identify accurately who is struggling as early as possible, be able to select the best intervention programs for your struggling kids, be able to differentiate instruction in reading, just to mention a few things. Good luck. And it's no surprise that about 300 papers on teachers' knowledge of foundational skills have all said the same thing, including pre-service teachers, that the teachers have an implicit understanding of the foundational skills in reading. For example, when you say, what is phonemic awareness? And you give them a multiple choice with 4 options, we have a good actually score there, like about 80% of our teachers know what it is. Then you give them a word, let's say fish, and say, how many sounds or phonemes do you hear in the word fish? And here where the problem starts. You see the number of correct responses go down dramatically. In Alberta, and we haven't published this yet, but I will be publishing it soon, the percentage of correct responses of grade 1 teachers teaching reading was 58% correct in questions related to the foundational literacy skills. 58%. And these are teachers of reading. Okay, so keep that in mind. So we get so many phone calls from parents saying, I need help. I don't get it from my school. Teacher says I have to wait until grade 3 for my child to be tested. There is no money at the school. Can you help me with an intervention that you have? Can you train me personally to do the intervention myself? And on and on and on. And so these concerns have accumulated to the point that some people in Ontario requested this report. They went to the Human Rights Commission and they requested this report. They call it For the Right to Read. And what did the Ontario Human Rights Commission report came up with? The obvious. In other words, what we knew since 2000 from the National Reading Panel, but who pays attention to researchers anyways?
Yep.
So you see now the history behind this. I'll speak a little bit about the recommendations. And I know, Kathryn, you told me that to focus mostly on recommendation 27, 28.
Yes.
Because they are related to the curriculum. So what do these recommendations say? By the way, are there any questions up to this point? Like I don't want to be talking all the time.
Not related to what we're talking about now. It's more stuff that we'll talk about after this.
Okay. So what did the recommendations say? They ask ministries of education to work with external experts. Here's the point I mentioned earlier. Bring in the experts. So that's very important. Someone is paying attention to us. To revise the curriculum so that there are no references to the queuing system or to any guessing strategies. So you might be familiar with the 3 queuing system. Has been failing the kids because it is teaching them basically to pay attention to context rather than teaching them explicitly to decode words. And I have to say that in the first draft of the ELA curriculum here in Alberta, we had included some sentences that they were under the section of reading comprehension. So we would say, look at the picture, like, can you make predictions by looking at the picture, what the meaning is? But some teachers, when they read that, it reminded them the 3 queuing system. And they said, oh, Georgiou is supportive of the 3 queuing system. And that was completely wrong because it was under the section of reading comprehension. So to avoid any confusion, in this revised draft that was released today, that has been removed totally, so that nobody can claim now that I am supporting anything close to the queuing system. It says also remove all references to other instructional approaches to teaching foundational reading skills that have not been scientifically validated. This is very risky in my mind, because who is judging whether approaches are scientifically validated? For this to happen, it means that the people who are the consumers of this report, they understand from research They can actually discern between science and pseudoscience, high quality research papers versus garbage papers that you can publish in any kind of journal today, because we get invitations to publish and pay to open access journals. So it doesn't necessarily that something that is published is good research. And I have seen a lot of garbage published in different journals that you have to pay. So that second recommendation in my mind is a bit risky. The third says that we should teach explicitly and systematically foundational reading skills. We are reinventing the wheel. That was said in 2000 by the National Reading Panel. It's good to repeat it. They say that repetition is the mother of learning. So I'm glad that it's there. It's clearly stated, so people can read it. Now we also see that it says that beginning in the kindergarten program and continuing grades 1 to 8 language curriculum explicitly state expectations. That's exactly what we have included. By having bullet points for every single outcome and goal that we want the teachers to cover in the ELA curriculum. And they give recommendations what we should be teaching: phonemic awareness, letter sounds, word reading, fluency, and importantly, for the first time ever, I think this is a monumental contribution, knowledge of simple morpheme. When we tested our grade 1 teachers in Alberta on morphology and morphological awareness, the percentage of correct responses was 0.15. I bet I would get the same score in BC.
Yep.
But I like to see this there. It's the first time that there is any reference to morphology. And there is tons of research in the last 10 years to indicate that teaching morphological skills to children actually improves their vocabulary, their spelling performance, and most importantly, their reading comprehension. It also says incorporate other aspects of a comprehensive approach to literacy, which are addressed in the research science, such as evidence-based instruction in oral language, reading comprehension, vocabulary, spelling, and writing. In other words, every aspect. We cannot just pick and choose one area. That's also part of the structured literacy, Kathryn, that often we see teachers that are saying, this year I will focus on phonological awareness. You cannot do this. To see growth of your students across areas, you need to provide a comprehensive instruction that covers all main or core foundational skills in reading.
Well, and I think it's important to mention that there's a lot of people out there that hear the term structured literacy or science of reading, and they assume that it's just talking about phonics instruction and phonological awareness without realizing that that's not what it means. It means so much more than that. It means those 5 pillars and connecting it to the writing and the spelling process.
Absolutely, absolutely. And now we added also the morphology, because it has been missing, and I know that it is extremely important, particularly in English. English, yes. We know that it's described as morphophonemic language, meaning that it pays equal attention to morphemes and phonemes. And right now, what are we doing? We are teaching phonics, but nobody cares about morphology. In other words, we are not respecting the main features of our own language. We are violating, in essence, the nature of the language by not teaching it explicitly.
Well, and it provides so much explanation for the spelling system, right? Because the morphophonemic approach, morphemes take precedence over phonemes when it comes to spelling patterns.
Exactly.
Especially in those academic and scientific words that we see in the higher grades when we see the students hitting those brick walls because they haven't memorized.
Absolutely. And we, like in our latest intervention in schools with grade 2 and grade 3 kids, we incorporated morphological awareness as one of the types of instruction. And we have seen great effects. So it actually produces good results. So recommendation 28, they call the ministry to make the teaching of these foundational word reading skills mandatory and not optional. That wouldn't go very well with Alberta Teachers Association. And with many, I think, probably other associations, not just our association. Mm-hmm. But I totally see why. And I agree with that statement. It should be mandatory. Why? Because we have seen that if you teach it, you have good results. If you don't teach it, kids are falling behind. And look at how much money you also spend on reading interventions in pull-out tier 2 or tier 3 programs. What are these programs covering? Same skills that teachers should have covered in their classroom. So that should tell us right away that if the kids improve by getting instruction in these skills, why not teaching them in the regular class for everybody? The ministry should also provide specific and scaffolded grade level expectations. We looked at this. I have to admit something, that research is ongoing. There are topics that we have not yet come to a consensus about what works best. And I'll give you an example. How often should we teach George letter sound correspondences in a week? There is only one study that has been done on that topic. Should we be teaching one letter sound per week? Should we be teaching 2 letter sounds per week? Should we be teaching every day? What's the best frequency, or how often should we be teaching? There is no answer. This is an open question. We can do research, and once we know the results, we can inform practice. But at this point in time, I'm going with what my teachers have told us, that when we asked them to teach 4 letter sounds a week, they felt that the kids did not have enough time to practice, particularly when they reached the digraphs and trigraphs, etc. That was very hard for them. They needed 1 extra day after the introduction to the letter sounds to master the letter sound that they were learning. So now we tell the teachers, well, maybe teach 2 or teach 1 new letter sound every second day. That makes it manageable, but I don't have actually data to prove that that's better than teaching 1 every week or every day. We want what we also know, and that's a fact, is that we want the kids to be independent readers as soon as possible, which means in the first 3 months of grade 1, you need to teach them as much as possible so that they can start reading on their own. So at least cover the singletons. The first 30 maybe letter sound correspondences in the first 3 months, so that you allow your students to read some simple text on their own. And then you keep building as the kids progress. It also says in this recommendation that these recommendations should be implemented. They are all expected in kindergarten. That applies maybe to Ontario. I don't know if kindergarten in Ontario is mandatory. In Alberta, it is not. So that has huge implications because you cannot really have these grade level expectations that all the kids will be able to do this phonemic awareness or phonics activities by the end of kindergarten if the kids don't go to school or join school in grade 1. And that's partly a bit why many of the grade 1 teachers in Alberta, they experience this problem because half of their class attended kindergarten and they have these prerequisite skills, but the other half has not. And therefore they need to start basically from scratch with these kids. So a solution to this would probably be, at least in Alberta, to make kindergarten mandatory as it is in many other places. But that's a political decision. It's not my personal opinion.
Mhm.
So to conclude, I would say that the Ontario Human Rights Commission report is very good. It was necessary. I'm glad that it was published. It came at the right time because I printed it out and I went to the minister and I said, look at this. That's exactly what we include in the ELA curriculum. So that was one more piece to make her understand of why this is important and why the criticism that tells you, oh, you have put too much PA in kindergarten, you should take it out, is not a valid criticism. Even the human rights people get it. Why not the education people?
Yes.
But the problem, as I say, I'm afraid that I know that in Ontario, they started having discussions about revamping their curriculum. So that's excellent. I'm hoping that the Ontario Human Rights Commission will be made publicly known in different provinces, not just because it's not what they say in that report. It's not applicable just to Ontario. It applies to BC, it applies to Alberta, it applies to everywhere. The recommendations are valid recommendations for every province and every state in North America, in the United States. But I am afraid that the roots of the literacy problems we see, they are deeper. And I put a question mark about the impact of the Ontario Human Rights Commission report. Why? Because unless the faculties of education actually change their undergraduate programs to include more intensive teaching of their undergraduate students, we do nothing. Like it's just a band-aid that we have put in order to perhaps make publicly known the problems in literacy and they can be fixed, but we are not really fixing anything because the people who are teaching literacy are not well prepared to do the teaching of these foundational skills. And I want to clarify here, I think I mentioned this multiple times, that the curriculum does not solve the problem. or all the time. You can have the best curriculum in the whole world. If the teachers don't know how to teach it, or if they are not well trained to teach it, you will not have an impact. You can also have a very average curriculum in place, but if you train your teachers to use best practices and apply preventative model in reading disabilities, then you have much better results. So we need to find the happy medium here. Reports are excellent, but we need to take action at multiple levels. Action at the government level, and I have to say I'm very pleased with what I have seen here and what I have experienced. I had no experience of any government work before getting, this invitation to work and develop the English language arts curriculum for Alberta. I was not involved in any government. But I have to say that I have been quite impressed that they're listening to outside experts much more than the education people. They are more open to hear what you have to say. And they are also looking for evidence. So if you show them evidence that something is effective, they are more willing to adopt. So exactly. That's a very positive thing. We have the evidence. We have never been short of evidence. We have tons of evidence. We produced evidence from our schools here. I've seen Val Hanson is in this call. Val was one of our interventionists in the grade 2, grade 3 intervention program in Lakeland Catholic. She has done a fantastic job working with the kids. We recorded Val, we shared the recording with the other interventionists. They have done an amazing job, and the results are clear. 82% of the kids improved on average 1.5 years in 4 months. We shared this data with Alberta Education. They liked that. On the basis of this data, then they made other decisions to support our schools.
Definitely. Well,
so,
and the thing,
yes.
As you were saying, it's not the curriculum alone. We also have to look at the resources that are in the classroom and where the districts are spending money on making sure, like some of the other recommendations looked at predictable text and leveled readers, which are very prevalent throughout Canadian school systems and American school systems. We need to make it so that we are providing the teachers with the materials that they need to do this sort of instruction and not have it be something that they personally have to purchase, because that's not fair to anyone.
And that's exactly, and thank you for mentioning this, Kathryn, because that's exactly the thing that my team of expert teachers in Alberta Education have done in the last year. This is the first time that it's done, as far as I know, the only province that has done this. And that's because I wanted it. And that was one of the conditions of accepting to be seconded to Alberta Education to oversee the curriculum. I said, if I don't have these people to develop sample lesson plans for every component of the curriculum and in every grade level, I will not accept this position. So what did my expert group of teachers did? And I publicly thank them. They have done an amazing job for let's say, phonological awareness. They have developed a sample lesson on rhyming, on deletion, on substitution, on segmentation for the different grade levels. So when the teachers click on the English language arts curriculum in Alberta, then they have access to these links. Of course, they have to sign up through their the New Learner Alberta, but they have access to these lesson plans. They don't have to buy anything. We make them available to them. But that's the first time to the best of my knowledge, that's the first time that a province has actually created anything like that. And I intentionally said today in my speech, I said, because I knew of the criticism that is coming my way, this is not to take teachers' autonomy away. We are providing these sample lesson plans for those teachers who don't have access to anything else and don't know perhaps how to teach phonological awareness or don't know how to teach phonics. You click on the PDF file, it opens just like in the Florida Center for Reading Research. You have those subcomponents, you click on it, and then there's a PDF that uploads and you can see the whole script, what you should say, the materials you need, how you present it, what the kids' responses should be. That's the way to move forward to support our teachers. And of course, there should be training that should happen in the schools. So that's a completely different level. It's beyond, I think, the school divisions have already planned or they are planning for that kind of training. And as you can see here in this slide that I have, this is what I have been doing in the last 12 years. See how many teachers get together because of the schools that agreed to train their teachers, and they called me to go in and train their teachers. They were sending them to one school when we could meet face to face. Now we do this work online, and that's why I'm saying, I would be very open to collaborate with school divisions in BC because we can do the same work online. I don't have to drive to the school and be there with every teacher. And importantly, we are targeting not just the teachers. If you want to be successful, you have to also target the principals. And this is my friend, Matthew Kierstad, who is a principal and has been working with other principals to train them on how do they read their data from their school and what best practices should look like in their schools. So I'll stop here, but before I stop, I want to actually show you some, because we talk about all these foundational skills, what should they look like in practice? Phonological awareness. It's good to have a scope and sequence. Many teachers find this very useful because they don't have to just pick and choose and they don't know if they are following the right author. In the curriculum, we actually tell them what skills to teach, but we don't tell them what you should be teaching every week. That's not the purpose of a curriculum. So in phonological awareness, one of the programs that I have recommended, and I think that it's well done, it's the Heckerty. I know that many schools in Alberta have been using the Heckerty. It has materials for preschool, kindergarten, and grade 1, and I'm hearing they are preparing something for grade 2. And I copied this, or I am presenting this sample here so you can see the scope and sequence. They have 35 weeks worth of materials. They tell you what skills you should be covering per week. And when you actually purchase that book, it also tells you what words to use every day And today I walked into a school where they had a demo for us, and they were using it, and the kids were also doing the different movements depending on bringing sounds together or pulling sounds apart, etc. This is an option. For expert teachers, I'm saying you can download materials from the Florida Center for Reading Research. They have much better selection of activities there, but it means that you have to create your own sequence, put things in order to teach them. And that, for some teachers, that is fine if they have experience doing it, but for some, junior teachers, they feel threatened or like scared to do that. So for phonological awareness, I have this. Now, the Ontario Human Rights Commission also spoke about decoding and phonics. Now, this was published, and so we need a scope and sequence for phonics. In Alberta, we said in kindergarten, they should be learning maybe a few letter sounds, but because it's not mandatory, we say at least start in grade 1, cover the first 60 most frequent, or the 60 that we think that they are frequent, and also bringing in some pedagogical considerations when we are teaching some of these letter sound correspondence. And then in grade 2, we ask them to teach the other 60. So a total of 120. We don't tell them teach more than that because we know there is evidence to show that more than 100, after 100, basically the kids reach a plateau in reading and decoding text from different books in K to 12. So you reach the maximum you can decode by just relying on phonics with only about 100. So by the end of grade 2, we want them to have covered these 100 and a little bit more to be on the safe side. We also teach them variable pronunciation of some of the vowels of consonants, like A, I, O, E, etc., or the G or the C, that they have different pronunciations. So this is from vowels. Then it gives you an order. See how the Jolly phonics, and I mentioned this because many schools in Alberta are using it. Maybe, I don't know, Kathryn, whether they use that as well in BC, the Jolly phonics. It only has 42. 42 will not take you very far. You need much more than 42. And with my doctoral student, Christy Dunn, we will be publishing a book through Pearson Education, and that is expected to come out before September, so sometime in August, with lesson plans for 120 letter sound correspondence, including videos of pronouncing the sounds. I think maybe also a video of Christy teaching one of the sounds in a whole class, and with all the materials that you need to teach it. These 120. So it's lessons for every day, basically. I can send you the information for that, but I'm just making this announcement that it's coming. And for every lesson, there will be a decodable book attached to it. So a recommendation for a decodable book or another book that schools may have and is appropriate for that specific letter sound. So our teachers in Alberta and maybe BC, if they will be teaching phonics, they can rely on that resource. It will be fantastic. The recommendation talks about fluency, efficiency. I consulted with Timothy Ranzinski on this, And Timothy, although at the beginning when I created the fluency part of the ELA in Alberta, I put in there that they had to teach 100 words in every grade level in the first 3 grade levels, so they would cover in total 300 high frequency words. Timothy said the kids should be learning at least 125 in grade 1 and then the rest in grade 2 and finish by grade 2 all the 300 high frequency words. And because Timothy Radzinski is the biggest name in fluency, and he has done all the research, I trust what Timothy Radzinski has to say. And that's why we said in the curriculum in Alberta that in grade 1, teach 125 high frequency words and teach in grade 2 the other 175. Now, what's the nice part about it? That my team of teachers created when they were developing the sample lesson plans and the resources for Alberta Education, many of these high frequency words can be taught or used when you're teaching your GPCs. They are completely decodable. And therefore, we linked the high frequency words that could be read with the letter sound correspondences. And we provided that resource to the piloting teachers and as of today, to all the teachers in Alberta that can sign up in newlearnalberta.ca. Now for vocabulary, because you asked me, Kathryn, what are we supposed to do for these foundational skills? Vocabulary is a bit tricky. And the reason is that we want teachers to teach tier 2 or tier 3 vocabulary. In other words, those words that are critical for students' understanding of the passage, that they are mostly unknown to most of the kids, and that they will appear in the future. They will come up multiple times in different texts. Because we don't know what text that each teacher will be using in their class, you cannot really tell them teach these words. Because if you do that, automatically you tell them what text you expect them to use. And I know that some teachers have much better text than what I would recommend to them. And I don't know of every possible text that is available for every possible topic. So what we did is that we actually taught teachers, these are the criteria for selecting the tier 2 words. And we used precise language. We said in the curriculum, we want you to teach tier 2 words. Because not only we want teachers to actually teach it, but we want to improve their knowledge of the terminology. And these are the terms that are used in vocabulary, tier 2 or tier 3 vocabulary. So I'll stop here.
Wonderful. I think you covered so much, and we do definitely have some questions that we are hoping to address. So one of them says, money needs to be invested in early learning. K and grade 1 is where we need to focus tiered early interventions in a universal design for learning model. How do we get more school districts to invest in early literacy? I'm an early literacy teacher in Surrey, British Columbia. I believe all districts would benefit from having ELT teachers working alongside classroom teachers focused on skills in the science of reading. So they're asking, how do we get more investment from the schools?
Yeah, very good question. And this comes down to the discussions I have had with the superintendent. Again, I present to them the evidence. and nobody can really challenge the evidence. It's the evidence, and particularly when the evidence comes from their own school belief. It's like their kids are speaking to them, and they say, hey, and this happened here in Alberta again. We went and we followed 300 kids from grade 1 all the way to grade 3. Every single year we would screen the kids. If they were struggling, we would give them pull-out intervention. By grade 3, we had 3 kids left who were struggling kids. What else do you need? The principals in the schools that participated in this intervention, because they were assessing their kids in norm reference assessments, they could see that they had no struggling readers. That was such a powerful message to them. By grade 3, I don't have anybody who is struggling, because we have done this work early. And therefore, they started investing more and more in early grades. And I taught them, put your very best teachers in kindergarten and grade 1. The most talented, knowledgeable teachers, put them in kindergarten and grade 1. Now we have about, I would say most of the schools I work with, they don't have any struggling, or they have less than 5% struggling readers past grade 3. And these struggling kids are the kids actually that they have other types of difficulties. And you don't know what to fix. Like they have problems in attention, they have working memory, intellectual difficulties, autism, FASD, and many other things, to name a few.
Well, and the thing to note is your research and the work that you're doing is amazing, but you're not the only researcher who has been able to get these results through early screening and intervention. And it's important to mention that with these early screening, we're not attaching a diagnosis to these children. We're calling them struggling readers or individuals who are at risk for reading failure. We're not attaching a label, a definition, we're just attaching support and making it so that they're not requiring this additional support as they get older. So making additional time and resources available within the school for the rest of the 6 years that they're at the school, or 5 years, 4 years, depending on how things are set up at the school that you're in. And you're changing lives.
Absolutely. And see how we can inform also policy. Alberta Education announced the $45 million initiative, and they said we'll give money to grade 1 to 3. For many people who had no idea, they said, oh, they're making discriminations. Why don't you invest in like our kids in grades 4 to 12? You don't care for these kids? The answer is, these are the grade levels that you have the best chances to help your students improve in reading. And therefore, we want to go full force, help the teachers, provide as many resources as possible in early grades.
And that's the problem with waiting until grade 3 for identification of these kids.
And I can tell you, Kathryn, that in Alberta Education right now, and I hope that this will happen in the next little while, such thing will no longer be stated. Mm-hmm. There will no longer be anywhere anything like wait until grade 3 to refer the kids for assessment. Yeah. But they will say, act as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. And that's because the research we have done and the work with this in collaboration with the schools here has allowed us to go with the data to the minister's office and say, see, this is the data. This is what we have to do. But we had to use the Ontario Human Rights Commission report. Like all of this is basically tools for us to go and ask and demand certain things. And I'm glad that they have been very responsive to what I have asked. And they have done basically whatever I asked them to do for the benefit of our kids, not for the benefit of George. I care less about myself, for the benefit of our kids and of our teachers.
Definitely. There's a question saying, what about the teachers who are already successful in teaching reading using more complex theory of reading? What does your research show about text reading, not word reading?
Yeah, and that's a very good point. If the schools, if there are teachers who are using best practices and they have already developed a nice sequence of lessons and they are teaching all of these foundational skills, continue doing this. I'm not saying change, but I want to see the evidence too, because I have seen also teachers saying, I'm doing a great job in my class. I don't want you to tell me what to do. But when we assess their kids, not just personally, when they assess their kids, their standard scores are clearly below average. So what they tell us and what they do, they don't go very well together. Now, if indeed your scores are above average because you're doing a fantastic job, and I have seen many of these teachers, like Valley, for example, keep doing what you're doing. I don't have to tell you to change anything. And because the question was related to text reading, text consists of words. So we have to teach word reading in order to get to the text reading. Unless the kids can read individual words correctly, they cannot read text correctly. However, text also has another layer, and that is prosody. Prosody meaning expression, intonation, pausing, which is something else that we also tell our teachers to pay attention to. But I don't want to be adding too many components, because the more I add, the more I am accused that there is no limit and we ask our teachers to do too much. But keep that in mind. Prosody is actually very important in text reading, and people are saying, like my colleague Dr. Leslie Wade-Woolley, it's the bridge between word reading and comprehension. So very important.
Definitely. And the other thing that I want to mention, and this kind of addresses a couple of the comments that I'm seeing, is that while recommendations 27 and 28 specifically talked about addressing external experts, there is definitely support in talking to internal experts within the school districts and the community, because there definitely are the teachers that are experts and pioneers in their schools that have done the research themselves. They have learned the best practices and they know what they're doing, and we can learn from them as well as researchers and interventionists to see how it works in the classroom. So we're not saying that only external experts need to be part of this process. There are recommendations looking about making sure that there's no problems with teachers that are doing a great job in their classroom, sharing their knowledge and saying, look, this is what I'm doing, this is how it's working. And we want to make sure that they're not being punished for saying this is working and it's doing a great job.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Much of the strategies and activities we developed and shared with teachers here in Alberta, they were formed and shaped based on the feedback we received. I had multiple discussions with Val, and she gave me her feedback. If it was not for Val's feedback, we wouldn't change a few things. But at the same time, I want to be a little bit careful here, Kathryn, because we have also seen comments that are completely unsubstantiated based on research. And at the beginning of my presentation, I said we need to distinguish between research, quality research, and poor research. And unfortunately, many of our teachers, they cannot really differentiate between the two. And rightfully so, they have not taken statistics, some of them. So, and they don't know, they see two papers published in two journals, they don't know, like, this is having a high impact factor, this doesn't have any high impact factor. So we have to be, I love to have discussions and I love to have feedback and comments, but I have also seen very bad comments, even from Alberta Teachers Association when I read the report. Comments like, oh, the new ELA draft does not include the recommendations made by neuropsychological studies. That shows me that whoever made that comment does not understand that neuropsychology can give us great information, but the information that we get is still under interpretation. And we have not yet have a very solid understanding of what aspects of the brain work and when they work. So yes to feedback, yes to collaboration. However, we need to also have some, boundaries in essence.
Well, yes, and I know there are several publishers or curriculum producers that are trying to say that their product aligns with structured literacy or the science of reading, and they're pulling out faulty statistics that don't really mean what they say that they're meaning. And it's giving people this false sense of security, and it's important for those people to be called out and for them to admit if they don't really have the evidence that they're claiming that they do or the knowledge that they do. It's very hard being someone who understands the research and is a critical consumer of the research, seeing these advertisements or these pieces of information floating around on social media and realizing that it's not actually truthful. But there are teachers who don't have the time to read the 14,000 peer-reviewed journal articles that have been published in the past years on research. I mean, I don't. And they haven't had, the advanced statistical analyses courses that you get as an academic. And that's completely allowed. That's okay that you don't have that expertise and knowledge and background. But in those situations, you have to trust the people that do.
And that's why we are here. I get phone calls all the time from Superintendent McMahon. He says, George, I got this paper. What do you think? Are the statements made in here in this paper valid or not? So, and I do the same thing for papers I don't understand. So sometimes, statistical analysis can be very difficult, complex. I call people who know much better and I ask for their opinion. That's why I ask the expert advice of the international experts for each component of the ELA curriculum. I'm not an expert on writing. Steve Graham is an expert on writing. I ask Steve what he thinks. I ask Susan Newman to tell me about vocabulary. I asked Timothy Randzinski to tell me about reading fluency, Rob Savage to tell me about phonics. And I trust them. That we can have opinions about different topics or know a little bit, that doesn't make us experts. And in this case, like I feel that the statement there is in the Ontario Human Rights Report. It's not, to offend the teachers or anybody else who's a professional, but it's actually to indicate that we have to go back to these people who have done this work already since 2000 or even earlier. And to Mark Siedenberg's comment on the problem that we have is that the research has not made it to classroom. So who is going to produce the research? The researchers, the external experts, and they come to inform practice.
Exactly. The next question or comment is, what are you basing your comments about what teachers do or don't do on? Is this based on scientific study or on observations of classrooms?
Yeah, I'm not sure what teachers do or don't means. Like if I can tell you that when I spoke about the teacher's knowledge, we tested their knowledge using a questionnaire that has been developed and used by Joshi and Washburn in several studies in North America. So it's a standardized teacher knowledge questionnaire. And we gave it to our teachers in Alberta. We measured their knowledge, how much they know about these things, and we will be publishing the results. However, I have also had the pleasure to observe teachers teaching, like today. We walked into a classroom. Sandra was teaching her grade 1 students. She did all the she covered all phonological awareness, and she went into phonics. It was a beautiful lesson. You could see the kids thriving in that class. And she was like, bam, 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 no breaks. Like she was totally focused. Kids knew what they were expected to do. But I have to say, I've seen also terrible lessons.
Well, and that's the importance of
I'll give you
having.
an example.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. The teacher said, I'm teaching phonological awareness. So she wrote down the word pale. So first violation. Phonological awareness is done orally, not in writing. So she wrote down the word pale, and they were doing phoneme substitution. So she said, pale replaced with n. So the kids couldn't do it. So she wrote down the word pale, and then she crossed the A and wrote on top of the A the N and said, what's the word? And the kids started saying, said, no, replace the p with n. So I couldn't believe in my eyes in what I was seeing there. But I have to say that at least in the schools that we have provided training to the teachers on these practices, when I walk into the schools, I'm very happy with what I see. And it's reflected in the kids' scores too. You can tell.
Definitely. And having that peer support and mentorship within the classrooms when you're learning a new practice is important. I know through the research that I've done, attending a 2-day seminar on a new teaching practice doesn't give you everything that you need to know. You need to have the continued support to have that implementation fidelity, or actually teaching it the way that it's meant to be taught. And it's a learning process for you, and you can't expect to be an expert right away. And being able to be in that vulnerable learning position
Yeah, absolutely. And what we have done here as well that I think is very important is that we created these communities of practice in the schools. I know that many, at least in the schools, school divisions I work, they have literacy consultants. And the literacy consultants, they go to shoulder support to the teachers. And when they have any questions that they cannot answer, then they call me or my graduate student. And we can provide immediate support to these teachers. So that is of paramount importance.
Definitely. So there's a teacher from Ontario saying that small group instruction has been difficult in their classroom. They use diagnostics to determine student levels in phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, comprehension, and writing ability, and then groups the students. Because they spend so much time managing behavior, it's hard to work with small group. In addition, it's hard to practice making sounds and reading when it's not very quiet. Do you have any suggestions for how they can engage other students in meaningful literacy activities while they pull out to do the small group work?
Yeah, you're getting into behavioral issues here, and certainly behavioral issues have been a major obstacle in teaching in every single classroom. We see this all the time here in Alberta as well, in the classrooms that I'm visiting. Now, I would say and I suppose you have already done this, like you set behavioral expectations from the very beginning of your class. I even say spend the week at the very beginning to set these expectations before you even start teaching reading. But I understand that you might be in situations where, like, even though you may have done this, you still have this behavioral problem. And it will impede teaching in general. Now, in these cases, we recommend that you have at least an educational assistant in your class to support your teacher. I don't think you can teach when you have kids running around and you're trying to get them to sit still in their chair for at least 5 minutes. Or do small group work when you have this kind of behavioral difficulty.
Right.
It's not a simple answer like do this and you will see this, because first I am not there. I don't know how complicated or like how serious are the behavioral problems in that class. But from my experience, when you see this kind of problems, then it's better if you at least have someone else to help you in that classroom.
Right. So there's a hello from Nova Scotia. Great webinar. Do structured literacy practices have a significant impact on reading achievement for historically marginalized learners, including Indigenous learners?
Best practices are best practices. Best practices, and the National Reading Panel did not say do this, but it applies only to native speakers. They didn't say do this and it applies only to non-Indigenous kids or to kids who don't have any behavioral problem. They're the perfect kids in the whole universe. And in 2008, August and Shanahan replicated the results for English language learners. I have worked with several schools on reserves. I train the teachers on the same practices. I don't change a single letter or slide in my presentation. Whatever I tell the regular or other schools, I tell also these schools. And I expect and I observe the teachers teaching the same way in these classrooms. The results are exactly the same. They improve the same way. So if you do these practices, expect a similar growth, no matter what the composition of your school division is. Maybe they will start at a lower starting point, but it's not the starting point that matters. It is actually the growth over time that matters. And these kids, unless they have other serious difficulties, they improve the same way.
Yeah. Now they're wondering if there's any limitations to the suggested approaches that you're suggesting for who it may not work, and what should be done for children who do not learn using these approaches. So I guess it's that 5% of students that you mentioned earlier that may have additional cognitive issues.
Yeah, 5 to 10% of the kids also are known to have dyslexia in the general population. This means that these individuals, and that's why we have adults with dyslexia, if we were growing out of it, we wouldn't have adults with dyslexia. So it means that 5 to 10% will continue to struggle in reading, despite the fact that you might be the best teacher in the whole world, and despite the fact that your school has the best resources and pours in millions of dollars for intervention. So there will be conditions that kids do not improve in reading, despite the fact that you give like the best practices. For example, sometimes you have kids that have serious working memory deficits. They cannot retain any information in their memory while you talk to them. So how will they do decoding and retain the sounds in the right order if they cannot retain any information in their short-term memory? That is a problem. Or kids that have very, very low speed of processing, or severe attentional problems. Of course, with attention, we don't know if it's reading that causes the attention problems, or attention is causing the reading problems. So that's a completely different story.
And I think those need to be looked at more on a case-by-case
Absolutely.
basis. You can't apply a blanket statement to saying, well, this is what you do with those students. It is one of those where you do need the intensive tier 1 support with additional diagnostics.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And I think individuals on the call have enjoyed it as well. And I'm sorry that we didn't get to all the questions, but I do want to be conscious of your dinner reservation.
I have to go downstairs for dinner with Superintendent McMahon at 6 o'clock. So thank you very much for inviting me. I have shared my contact information. It's Georgiou@ualberta.ca. You can find me online too if you Google my name. If you have questions, feel free to email me. I always respond to the emails from teachers or parents. And as I said, I'll be happy to work with school divisions, no matter where they are in Canada, particularly now that these online platforms have allowed us to communicate from distance. So thank you, Kathryn, for inviting me, and thank you to everyone who attended this webinar.
Thank you. Yes, and this will be available for a replay on the Right to Read Initiative YouTube channel, website, and available as a podcast on the Right to Read Initiative podcast. Thank you, everyone.